each year I pick a theme for the course so that we could take a period of time, a long period of time, and let that theme develop. So over the years, it's been different kinds of things. Like last year, it was the use of the arms, and the year before that, it was working with standing and walking. The cycle that I taught in Santa Cruz, the first 7 years I taught it, I did it without repeating anything. I didn't repeat a lesson or anything. I mean, probably could have gotten longer, but that was my compositional constraint, you know, like new themes every year. So then I taught both in New York and in Santa Cruz some stuff that I taught before, but this year I'm teaching something new. So this particular theme is something that I've taught in training programs and in workshops and other ways, but I've really never done what you could call this a supervision course or something like that, on balance. And the PR was, I think it was balance and coordination. But as I prepared for the class, I thought I should really title it differently. Yeah, because I think, I mean, not that coordination is not important, but I would say something like balance and orientation, or equilibrium and orientation. Not that the course is really going to change much, but you know, as I was studying, preparing for this and doing some reading, I kept thinking, God, that would have been a better title in retrospect. And I think you'll see, even today and tomorrow, as we begin with this material, why I said that. And I'll come back to that later, why I'm saying orientation and what that has to do with it. The idea of the class is that we're going to look at, you know, well, balance is pretty central. It's pretty much invisible in everyday life, right? But it's really central to what we do. I gave a talk in the training in Kirkland this morning on looking at development. You know, because it's the beginning of the training and they're doing a lot of baby moves and stuff. So I gave a talk on developmental theory and orientation and stuff. And one of the things I said to them is I said, you know, most of the time our nervous system is really busy making sure we don't embarrass ourselves. Right? That we don't fall down, that we don't go boom. Because, you know, like, I mean, I could be standing up and I gesticulate, I wave my hands around. I'm changing my center of gravity every time I do that. And yet somehow I manage to stay upright most of the time, not fall down. And that's a pretty complex activity. So, you know, when I'm talking about balance and coordination, we're going to talk about dealing with those issues with people who have that as their, you could say, their presenting problem. And they come to you because they have difficulties with balance. And, you know, whether that means they've had some kind of brain injury, or they've had a viral infection, or, you know, whatever it is, they have Parkinson's disease, balance is one of their central issues, right? Or maybe you're working with kids who have developmental problems, neurological problems. But really, balance is central to everything that we do. It's really central to our ideas as Feldenkrais practitioners. And so, though the idea is going to be working with balance and working with equilibrium, if you don't work with people who have that as a presenting issue, I think you'll find what we're going to do is still really central to your practice. Okay. In doing these courses, I'm looking for a blend of a couple of different things. When I started teaching this, I really started teaching basically lesson recipes. So when I started teaching, one of the things I was really interested in is teaching lesson structures. Right? Teaching. So if you look at the history of how Moshe trained people, every training that he did was different. I mean, really different. Moshe was kind of he was a fully paid member of throwing out the baby with the bathwater. And because every time he started afresh. He started a brand new experiment. So the first training was in Tel Aviv. Right? The first training was Mia's apprenticeship. Mia Seagar. And she worked with him as an apprentice. And he only did that once. You know, the next training was the Tel Aviv training. There were 13 people in that training. There was as many people as he could put into the basement. Oh no, the Feldenkrais Institute. I'm not running, right? That's where he worked. He worked in a basement. But I mean, that was as many people as he could fit in there. The training was 3 years long. They met 6 days a week, every day but Shabbat, and high holidays, right? Just continuously for an hour and a half a day. There was no ATM. Yeah, because everyone was in Moshe's ATM classes, or most of them were, but it was really FI focused. And when he taught FI in that training, I wasn't there, so this is all rumor. I confess ahead of time. I mean, this is what other people have told me who were there. But, you know, I've talked to a few people who were in that training, and I was in Paris a couple of years ago, and Miriam Pfeffer, who is the kind of the founding mother of Feldenkrais in France, was doing it in, she did these, I don't know, I don't know if it was weekly or every other week, she did these kind of advanced training supervision groups in her home for people who had studied with her before. And it was just a group of, small group of people, and she was teaching from these notes. These notes, I mean, that's kind of, well, that's another story, I'll tell you the story later, but she was teaching from the notes from the Tel Aviv training. So she had these notes in her hand that were in Hebrew, and she was translating on the fly into French, which is my mother tongue, which is why I can understand what was going on. And it was really interesting because the language was very medical. That doesn't come from Miriam, her background is in yoga, but it was like, Moshe was using what you might think of as fairly clinical and anatomical language, and he taught ATMs as if, or I'm sorry, he taught FIs as if they were ATMs. So there were step-by-step processes, right? Then, you know, then the next training had, I don't know, 60-some, 70 people in it, right? And that training was kind of interesting. And, you know, at the end of the third year, it was a 3-year training. Moshe told people they weren't ready to graduate. They had to come back for one more year. And the fourth year was a clinical practicum. So I think actually it was Gabi and Mia who taught the ATM lessons, and you can buy those from Feldenkrais Resources. They were updated by my friend Richard Ehrman, and the original lessons, the lessons are great, but the original thing, which I've gotten years ago, was like Xeroxes of different people's notes. Different people's notes. So every version was, every lesson was slightly different. Some people were really good at typing, remember those things? And some people were really bad. And so there were scrawls and their abbreviations were different. So anyways, the new set's really great, but he didn't, I don't think he taught ATM that year. He did FIs and he watched people work, and it was really FI oriented. And then there was Amherst, in which he did very little FI teaching in the first few years. So like I say, every time was different. I think many people's ideas is that, you know, like I remember being told by someone, that, you know, every FI should be different. And each FI that you give, you make up for the person there, and it's a unique creation. This by a person who I think really does paint by numbers lessons. So, you know, there's this idea that, you know, you shouldn't, like, some people think, well, you shouldn't follow recipes, right? Because then you'll never learn to cook. Obviously, they've never been in the kitchen. I don't think most chefs were ruined by learning how to follow recipes, right? Now, to be a great chef or even a good cook means you have to be better than just being able to follow a recipe. I mean, there is an art to that. If you can't do that, well, then you better be creative. But, you know, sorry, my metaphors rarely leave the kitchen. You'll realize how true that is. Star Trek in the kitchen, that's pretty much my favorite thing. Mr. Spock in the kitchen. I have to think of a story for that. But, you know, so in doing this course over the years, I really have taught lesson structures. You know, in a way you could talk about them as if they're processes or procedures, step by step. Now, I think that's important because as you go through doing lessons, you start to develop a kind of understanding for them that isn't about the particular lesson, that is about particular types of lessons, and kind of an aesthetic for what a lesson is, a feeling for what is a full lesson. What makes a lesson a lesson? And, you know, I mean, all that studying is so that when you're working with somebody, you can give them a lesson, not necessarily you have to follow all the steps, but so you start to develop something beyond just being able to follow a recipe. You know, you can have a great recipe for pasta and only have rice in the cupboard, so you have to modify it. Right? But after a while, when you learn to cook something, I mean, like, you start to understand the sense of different kinds of kitchens, different kinds of cuisines. Right? So if you're like, you know, like, I don't know, you know that if you put certain things together, you're going to get something that's a Thai dish or an Italian dish or a Chinese dish. But, you know, you could take like the ingredients of a Thai dish and the ingredients of an Italian dish, and they're pretty close to the same. Garlic, tomatoes, onions, peppers, you know, basil even. And you add ginger, all of a sudden you're going in the Thai direction, right? But I mean, these things are very similar. But you start to get a sense of how you make a dish one way or how you make a dish the other way. So I think that following recipes over time starts to help you become a good cook, and you know what belongs in a dish and what doesn't. You You know, what is a lesson? Hey, what is a lesson and how it holds together? I lived in a collective household. My hair was much longer, and with 13 other people for a while, and you know, we took turns cooking and cleaning. 2 people cooked every night, 2 people cleaned every night. And one night, my friend Jonathan made this dish. It was tomatoes, onions and garlic, peppers, pasta, cheese, you know, baked in a casserole. Oh yeah, he put bananas in it. Now for most people, I mean, in some cultures that would work. We ordered out pizza. He was mad at me for months. But it was just really gross. It just didn't work, right? But you know, that's a sense of what makes a dish a dish. And there's a same sense of what makes a lesson a lesson. And I think, you know, improvisation is the last form of any art. You have to be really good at it. I have a picture hanging in my house, and it's of a woman, the back of a woman looking out a window. In the background you can kind of see the water and a boat really far off. And I always ask people, you know, who that was. Can they tell me who painted that without getting up close? Right? And no one guesses. It's a Salvador Dali. You know, Dali spent years studying classical art before he started making dripping clocks and skulls and all kinds of weird things. So I think there's something to be said for the apprenticeship to a certain skill. You know, that takes time. And at the beginning, learning the basics and following the recipes or studying the classics is really important. And so my idea of teaching this course over the years has really been to teach classic lesson structures. I also think that it's important not just to learn structures, but to learn strategies for generating lessons. Because Moshe, you know, he didn't have structures when he started. And I actually don't think he even had techniques. Right? He had somebody who had a challenge, a difficulty. He had some idea of what he might do that would help that person, and he created the method out of that. He created the techniques, and he created the strategies that we use for creating lessons. So over the course of these 10 days we're going to spend together, we will do some things that are more structure-oriented, kind of following the recipe step by step, and more that are strategy-oriented. How do you generate a lesson? Because I think the purpose of studying, you know, being in a training and doing advanced trainings is to learn how to reason in a Feldenkraisian way. I say the word reason rather than think because I'm thinking about Moshe's idea, talks about this in Awareness Through Movement, that every waking state is made up of 4 aspects: feeling, acting, sensing, and thinking. So when I say reasoning in a Feldenkraisian way, I mean acting, sensing, feeling, and thinking in that way. So, you know, the purpose of a training is not so you can read ATM lessons, because you don't have to go to a training to do that. And it's not so you can follow these steps and do FI techniques, because, you know, you can read a book and do that, or, you know, whatever. There's ways of learning it, but it's really to be able to take a situation and respond to it in a Feldenkraisian way. Right? And not in terms of him as a person, but in terms of the methodology that we have. So over these next 10 days, that's our project, is to look at these questions about balance and equilibrium and orientation and coordination from a Feldenkraisian perspective. Using the specific example of this situation as a way of developing our ability to respond in that way.